One.
Oop.
Jim Joyce, Wednesday.
The future is here. The future is
The
here. I
future
love the
health
future.
is for those who can, I forgot, who can envision it. So I just came back. That's us, right? I think. And our guests, many.
Exactly.
So you were in Italy last week, right? Or am I going
Correct.
crazy? Yeah.
Yep.
Correct.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
in Italy
right.
now.
That was awesome.
I spent
Florence,
well,
Tuscany. Where are you?
Yeah, now in Florence, so at my older's apartment, and we're helping her move, and we're actually gonna work out of here for a bit till I think end of next week. So that's kind of nice.
Great.
And then before this, I was actually in Salerno with our Healthware friends, Roberto. So that was pretty
excellent.
awesome as well. Hot,
Great.
though, hot. So anyway. We have an awesome guest today, and we'll just dive right in. And well, before we do, how are you doing, man? I'm sorry we didn't get to catch up Monday.
No, I'm doing awesome, man. I had a week. I for mental health purposes, I totally recommend vacation in Italy on the beach specifically. I just shut down. I had one of those years, but thank you for asking. I'm rearing and ready to go and ready to meet our guest here.
Awesome. All right, so let's go. We're gonna let Daniel Nathrath in. He is the CEO and co-founder of Ada Health. And there he is. And he was told not to call us any bad names coming in because we're already recording. So Daniel, Jim, Daniel, good to see you again. It's been a while. Not
Daniel.
Really.
The old delay. Hey, Daniel, nice to meet you. Pleasure. I love your background.
Very nice to meet you. Yes. So thank you for having me. I was very tempted to call Eugene bad names, but Jim, we haven't met before, so it would be kind of rude to do it.
Well, I'm calling from Ireland, so it would be very customary to kind of dig right in,
Well, we're gonna have some crack fun, right? I learned
right.
that's the not actual
Dr.
crack.
No crack.
It's spelled different. Dr. No Crack. Yeah, that's Chandana. So Daniel, welcome to the shot. I know we've been trying to, even though we're meticulously unproduced, we've been trying to get you on for a bit, just from a scheduling perspective, but here we are. So awesome to have you. And for our millions of listeners and viewers, tell them who you are. And in any, you can start all the way back to 2 years old or whatever, or however you want to play it.
I know quite well what 2 years old feels like because my son just turned 3. So I'm constantly get reminded of what that means. Lots of tantrums. Some things never change. So my name is Daniel. I'm co-founder and CEO of Ada Health. And as you can hear by my accent, I'm originally from Germany. I now live in the US. I trained as a lawyer a very long time ago. I studied law both in Germany and in the US. I'm admitted to the bar in the city you see behind me in New York, but never really practiced as a lawyer because when I studied in the US in the mid-90s, I discovered the internet. And then I was like, okay, I want to do something with this rather than working just with legal books all the time. So I ended up joining an internet company called Lycos. Some of you might be old enough to remember what that was. It was a search engine / portal, and we were always trying to compete with Yahoo, and then Google came out of left field and sort of crushed everyone else. But it was an interesting experience. I built up the legal department together with a colleague, and then used the opportunity to pivot out of the legal career path and sort of work on the business side of things. So we did an IPO, we acquired 50 companies all across Europe. Then we realized, oops, all these companies are even less profitable than we are. So we had to, I was then put in charge of the post-merger integration project. We reduced, so we were 40 people working in temporary office containers when I started. After a year, we were 1,500 people. And then a year later, we were 700 people. And then I was like, okay, well, I'm using Google all the time. Probably we're not going to win.
So you weren't even eating your own dog food while working there and building that. That's crazy.
I tried, but I learned a lot of valuable lessons during that time. And one of them is that you really, I think, have to focus on your product, which, you know, Lycos, it was quite an impressive story, actually. The US founder of Lycos Inc., he took the company public. I think it was the fastest company to get to a NASDAQ IPO ever up until that time. But what they didn't really do was focus on the product. And I think ultimately that was probably part of the downfall of Lycos, because, you know, if, as you say, if you don't eat your own dog food, that's probably not a good sign.
By the way, I think, unless I'm mistaken, the logo had a dog in it, right? So that was kind of pun intended. Yes. Okay, I am aging myself now. It wasn't just a logo.
It was, so the idea there was, how do you sort of, and some branding agency, I think, came up with it. How do you sort of visualize fetching a search result? So it was like fetch, and then so we often had dogs in the office for photo shoots and all this stuff. But ultimately, I thought I should see some other industries, so and learn more about business, because as a lawyer, you don't know that much about business. So I didn't.
Daniel, before you go on, I'm sorry to interrupt there. It's actually kind of interesting, and as you get to Ada Health, right? Because Lycos, as one of the first search engines out there, from even a legal perspective, there must have been so many new things that were never there before, from, you know, from legislation, from cookies and privacy and all of that. And then I'm sure we'll reference it back, because I'm sure that's helping in your Ada story as well. Lots of are still uncovered.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there were tons of new legal questions, and that was, so initially I came via this angle. I actually started writing, before I joined Lycos, I was working on a PhD thesis about online standard terms and conditions. And then I naively thought I could do this sort of on the side while working in a tech startup. But I eventually ditched that. I had already written like 120 pages, but the topic was kind of running away from me. It was, it's obviously a big issue even now, when you don't really think about all the terms you accept when you click, I agree, you have no other choice. And then suddenly you've entered into a contract with tons of terms that you probably wouldn't want to agree to. So I was writing about that, but then we had lots of legal challenges, because it wasn't just a search engine. We also acquired some communities, which were really, if you look at it from today's perspective, precursors to what Facebook is nowadays. So we had something called Tripod, where people could build their own homepage. And then, you know, we had an entire team that was constantly looking at monitoring the content on there. And then there was someone who threatened to, I think, kill himself and kill others. And, you know, our monitoring team discovered that, and they came to me as a lawyer, and they were like, what should we do? So we called the police. The police went to the house, and was indeed a teenager who was suicidal, and the parents were super grateful. So lots of things that, you know, it was late 90s. These were all new things. Nowadays, you know, all of this social media stuff's happening, but these were like the earliest precursors of today's social media. And I was right in the middle of it. So it was really interesting, not only from a legal perspective, but also in terms of how technology was developing. So I really learned a lot during that time. And yes, indeed, sometimes I go back to this when I think about when I have to make decisions nowadays, and I think about what did we do wrong back then, and what, you know, that we shouldn't do now, both in terms of the product, but also in terms of how you grow an organization. We basically did something that you could have called blitzscaling before Hoffman wrote the book. But we did it before we really had product market fit, and I think that's a big risk. Blitzscaling is great once you have a product market fit.
I do want to actually I do want to come back to it, but I interrupted earlier. You were into your MBA, because I do want to get your thoughts on digital health and blitzscaling. But I wrote it down. We're not going to let it go. So keep going. MBA.
Yeah, so I thought I should learn more, and it's a coincidence, but I have this mug. So I went to the University of Chicago, but only really because they had a campus in Barcelona at the time, because I really wanted to be in Barcelona. I love that city, and I'm quite jealous, Eugene. I know. I think that's where you live nowadays. So I only applied to business schools in Barcelona at the time. That was IESE and University of Chicago, and then I just. Basically, it was an executive MBA program, and we had a lot of fun. I did learn a bit. It's a great school, but I think they finally decided they wanted people who were serious about business and who didn't only want to be in Barcelona. So partly probably it's my fault.
Why can't you do both? You can do both.
I think you can do both, but they eventually moved the campus to London because they were probably worried about their reputation or something. So but it was a great learning experience, good network. I'm still in touch, made friends from that time, and it's a great thing to look back to, and I hope that I will eventually get to spend more time in Barcelona one way or another. And then I started, I did my own startup. It was sort of in the
by the way, you have people there. You have people there.
We do have team members.
You have a team member, so I think you need to come in for a team meeting. Right, that's what it sounds
definitely.
like.
I mean,
open invite.
That always has to be an excuse to go to Barcelona. We do have. So when COVID happened, like many other companies, we basically went hybrid, and we decided we would let people work from wherever they want, like many other companies have done. We still have our headquarters in Berlin. But we did have, surprisingly, some team members who said, if I can choose any place in the world that I can work from, it's going to be Barcelona. So that's why now we have team members there. So I did that. I ran my own startup afterwards, sold it, and then I worked in e-commerce in secondary ticketing actually for some years. It's a company called Viagogo, which was founded by the same person who founded StubHub. And that had really nice sort of fringe benefits because I'm a big football fan. I like music. So during those few years, I was basically always in soccer for our American friends. I was always in football stadiums every weekend. I was in concerts. I was in the backstage at the MTV Music Awards when that was still a thing. And so it was great from that perspective. But after a few years, I did feel like I wasn't really doing something with a deeper purpose. I wasn't really doing something that made the world a better place. And so I was almost 40 at the time, and I was like, okay, I annoyed people as a lawyer. I annoyed people as a strategy consultant. Oh, I completely forgot that phase. That was before.
You tried to erase it. You tried to erase it.
No, actually, that's also. It's also a great experience. It was a great learning experience. I worked at BCG, Boston Consulting Group, for a few years to see some other industries, which I did, and worked with some of the smartest people I'd ever meet. But it wasn't the right thing for me. I mean, maybe partly because the projects I had were mostly restructuring projects. So I was a little bit like George Clooney, not quite as good looking, but I was doing the same thing. I was flying around, basically laying off people. So my friends were joking with me. They were like, this movie is about what you did back then. And while that was a good learning experience, it also wasn't my final calling. So I was like, okay, I annoyed people as a lawyer, as a strategy consultant. I did not gambling, but a skill gaming startup. And then I did basically online scalping or ticket touting for a while. And now finally I need to do something that my parents aren't embarrassed of. So I was approached by some former colleagues, and they said, we met this genius scientist, and he wants to figure out a way. He wants to apply his learnings from like decades of research into how the human brain works, how humans think. He wants to apply those learnings to medical diagnosis. And he's a grandson of a scientist called Heisenberg, not the Breaking Bad Heisenberg, but the real Nobel Prize winning Heisenberg.
That's where my head jumped right away. I'm like,
I know. I watched that show. I mean, that's actually the last thing I really binge watched ever, and it's really you can't stop watching it. So I spent an entire vacation just watching it. But so he is really a genius. My co-founder and friend Martin, and I met him. I only understood about half of what he was telling me, but it seemed fascinating. And I come from a family of doctors, but I had deliberately tried to stay away from healthcare because I know how difficult it is. And that I also knew that doctors weren't necessarily the earliest adopters of technology. So I said, this is a really crazy idea to try and get doctors to use technology when they first of all, most of them really are rather afraid of technology, and also the bit of technology they have to deal with was built to allow them to bill and to even make money, but to give them a technology that helps them diagnose better, to some extent, is a little bit like giving someone a solution who doesn't think they have a problem.
Sure.
Because misdiagnosis happens because people might feel very certain that they're right, but maybe they're not. So 15%, 20% of diagnoses are actually a misdiagnosis at least. So it was a challenge, and if I had known how long it would take to get some like market traction in digital health, I would probably not have done it. But in hindsight, I'm very glad I did, because through it I also met my third co-founder and now wife, Claire, who, like Martin, is a genius. I'm just the business guy basically, and they are the really smart people. So one of them is.
No, I was going to say, so my first question is, because you started with you only understood 50% of what Martin was saying. So I hope you're at 51 now or something like that. That's my first question.
It's gotten a little better. It's gotten a little better. Right. But so it's not because what he was saying didn't make sense, but I think if you're an outsider who doesn't have experience in healthcare on digital health, then, or for that matter, with, he's basically a neuroscientist. So he's just super smart. So it wasn't because what he was saying didn't make sense, but I had to get into it, and I'm still learning today. So it might not be 50%, but I'm still not at 100%, but it's a bit better now.
And then the second question is, you start talking about Claire, right? First you kind of said, well, I didn't want to be a doctor. You married a doctor now. But the second question that I had is, any pointers? I mean, Marina and I have been together for 25 years. We've been running the company now for 2.5. Any other pointers? You guys been doing this a little longer than 2.5, running together? I'll pass it on.
Don't work with your wife.
No, it's actually, I mean, I know that's the conventional wisdom. I have to say, it's been 10 years. We've been married now for almost 8 years. So it's been over 10 years, and we've been married now for almost 8 years. And so naturally, we don't really know it any different. So it's hard to make any comparison. But I have had investors who had a problem with it. The investor is no longer with us. I mean, he's still alive. No misunderstanding. I didn't.
Yeah. No, we got it.
He's diagnosed.
I also had an investor pitch where, I showed the team slide. Everything had gone really well. Whole pitch. They were super interested, and I said, "Here's the team slide. And by the way, my co-founder, just full disclosure, she's also my wife." And the guy got up and said, "This meeting is over." I was like, I thought he was joking. This was a Silicon Valley investor, actually rather successful fund.
Right.
I know we talked about it when we caught up a couple of weeks back, but one of the things we say, if that question comes up, in your co-founder, the key component of all of this is trust, right? And who do you trust more? Right. I mean, Marina and I have been together for 25 years, married for 23, raised 2 girls, right? And this is our 3rd baby that we're taking care of and growing, and this one is going to be better than the first 2. So no.
And Eugene, have you had that experience, Eugene, with the investors?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did. We did. We get the question.
there are plenty of examples where, I mean, I do acknowledge there from an investor perspective, there is a little bit of an added risk, but you can sort of, you can look at sort of ways to mitigate that risk, so contractual ways and everything. But I think there are also real advantages to it, as you say, trust, and then you can look at successful examples like Eventbrite. It was a founder couple.
BioNTech right there, right?
BioNTech, of course. I mean, it's a great example. And for us, even within the company, I don't think it's been a problem, because we, obviously in our case, I'm on the business side. Claire is heading the medical field, so we have pretty clear areas of responsibility, and it's worked quite well. I can't, obviously I don't fully know, but I don't think that it's been awkward for either our co-founder or our leadership team members or anyone else on the team.
We should have had Claire on with you. I don't know why we didn't think of this. That would have been fun.
Yeah, well.
All right, next
maybe
time.
We can have another episode.
Yeah,
I was going to say, we have her separately and compare
6.
the stories.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there was a TV show at some point where they compare the stories, and then they're completely different, and you're like, everyone gets a good laugh out of it.
Right. If
I think you had one of our former team members on. I'm a big fan of your podcast, so I watched the episode with Rashida.
Yeah, that's right.
She worked with us. She's from the US, but she worked with us in Berlin, and
that's awesome.
Great working with her. And
I think it's one of those interesting things. Like, I always feel like if you're upfront, like I always feel like with Eugene, when you're going in, like you're super upfront about it, right? And so it's kind of like like I heard, Bill Toronto did a podcast with Breaking Health the other day, and he talked about. Yeah, it was good. He talked about the diligence. He says the only thing he loves meeting with early stage companies. He's like, the only thing he really appreciates is if people do their diligence beforehand, right? And so if you're super upfront about it, and you're, like you said, you do it right in the pitch, and then frankly, like, who knows, like these things, like creating these startups are just they're just wild, kind of inventions in their early stages, and then they eventually stabilize and start to become, repeatable business models, and, with all kinds of interesting aspects of it. But businesses from the beginning of time have been managed by families, right? I mean, that's kind of in some ways, I think that's feels to me like it's a control thing.
That's actually a good point. I haven't thought of that, especially like in the SMB world, right? I mean, again, not probably, venture scale
like
businesses, but
Succession.
Great show.
Succession.
Yeah, some of the most successful businesses in Germany, there are quite a few sort of hidden champion type businesses which might have like hundreds of millions in revenue, but they're barely known, and most of them are run by families. That's true. I hadn't thought of that.
Hoffman LaRoche, right? I can't talk about families, That's awesome. So now, if maybe one little, like, so if I'm interacting with your technology, just for people that aren't that familiar with it, what am I getting out of it? Like, what's happening?
Yeah, so going back to what we started doing, we had originally built decision support software for doctors, which was really powerful. And sometimes I say we actually built what IBM Watson's marketing team had promised they would build.
Okay.
But going back to some of these challenges, it was indeed not easy to sell to doctors. So about 5.5 years ago, I think we launched a version for patients, which had always been my wish from the beginning, because I come more from the consumer side.
Right.
And I knew that about I think 7% of all Google searches are actually health related, and then 1 out of 5 of those is directly a symptom. So we created a chatbot style interface before chatbots actually became a bigger thing. And it works pretty much like a WhatsApp chat with your trusted family doctor. So 24/7, you can just take the app, and like you would if you go to your trusted doctor, you start with your presenting complaint. So you say, okay, I have a headache. And then, like a good doctor would, it starts asking you questions, like when the doctor would take the patient history. And it takes about 5 minutes. It's a dynamic question and answer flow. So it's not a decision tree, but it adapts and it narrows it down to then give you two main things. One, an idea of what condition or conditions might be causing your problem. And then two, some advice on what to do next.
Okay.
That's the current product, and it really works like a WhatsApp or WeChat or Kakao Talk, depending on where you're from.
And am I if I'm using your system, am I a member at that stage, or is that even, do I get that right in my consumer experience as I go on your site, or do I have to be part of your clinical system?
Yeah, so it's all free, and the reason we ask for you to register is so that you can that you can go back to it and basically build a profile over time. And like if you were to go to your family doctor, you would prefer, I think, that the second time you come, the doctor already knows who you are, knows your underlying risk factors, knows your prior conditions. And that's why we asked to register. But it's really easy. I mean, you just register it and then you have a profile. And that's where the product is today on the consumer side. But interestingly, once we launched this consumer product some years back, we wanted to be careful, so we launched it in New Zealand first to sort of we thought if something goes wrong, it's far away. I think many tech companies,
seal it off.
Many tech companies actually do that, and then very quickly it was the #1 medical app in New Zealand. Australians started asking for it, so we launched in the Australian iOS App Store. And then eventually we launched it in all the iOS app stores, and I think half a year later also on the Google Play Store. And since then it's been downloaded, I think 12 million times. We have about 30 million cases in the system right now. Every 2 or 3 seconds, someone somewhere in the world is entering a new case. But this is all purely on the consumer side, and we're not yet offering a paid version of it. So we had to find a way, as you can imagine, to monetize. And then we were getting a lot of inbound interest from all kinds of different stakeholders, health systems, insurers, telehealth companies, governments even, and also life sciences companies. So today we work with some of the largest health systems and most innovative health systems in the US, for instance. We also work with the largest health system in Portugal. We work with some multinational health insurers. We work with the government of Ontario, for instance, where they're building a digital primary care, a digital front door to primary care for their entire 15 million population. And we are part of a consortium that is offering that. And we also work with life sciences companies. Those are interested in aggregated learnings from aggregated data, for instance. And we see a lot of potential to help people get to the right treatment faster. So our original mission was to get people to the right diagnosis faster. That hasn't changed. And obviously, if you get to the right diagnosis faster, it can get you to the right treatment faster. And my ambition for ADA is really to take it from just giving you care navigation and a first idea of what you might have and generic advice to extend this to more of an end-to-end journey where through us, you will also get eventually a prescription if needed and the treatment you need delivered to your home. And that's something we're working on where we think we can make an even bigger impact on patients, hopefully.
Amazing.
It's interesting to see, I think, and this is a bit of, kind of start with tech, but then the realization that A, the human beings surrounding that tech are still needed, and B, I think kind of more, let's call it holistic and, broader care spectrum is a key. And actually, the interesting where I was going to go a little bit with it is, knowing the German market and just this, the European Union is not, yes, it's one European Union, but there's, 28, I'm 28 countries, right? 27? I should know this by now. But the question that I would have for you is, there's a lot of digital health activity in Europe, but look, ADA, you guys are now also in US, take Konstantin and Jonas and Kaya Health, right? US, kind of migrated to US as far as the presence. Why? What are your thoughts on this? And what does Europe need in order to really retain companies like yourself, right, and scale?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a shame actually, because there's, I'm really, to some extent, personally quite familiar with various ecosystems, digital health ecosystems. So obviously the German digital health founder landscape. I lived in London for a few years, traveled to the US all the time, and also have been in Asia quite a bit. So what I have to say is I don't think in terms of ambition and quality of the solutions and also ambition of the entrepreneurs, I don't think European and German digital health entrepreneurs are worse. I just think it's made much harder to succeed in European markets and specifically in Germany. And I think, unfortunately, it's to some extent a matter of mindset. In Germany, you have a pretty large scene of people who talk a lot about digitalization and all of this stuff. But there are a lot of bureaucratic hurdles where things are meant well, but I think the approach needs to be rethought. Unfortunately, I'm a lawyer by training, so I know that regulation will always be far behind innovation. And the approach in Germany and also in the EU, which might be to a large extent driven by Germany, is something new appears, and then the regulator is like, okay, let's regulate it. We don't fully understand it, but just in case, let's regulate it.
Sure.
Whereas in the US, the approach is more, okay, we're going to apply enforcement discretion. We're going to watch it. We're going to sort of make sure patients are not being harmed, but we're not going to sort of stop it in its tracks. And that, I think, is one of the aspects. The other aspect is, of course, market size. As you said, it's 27, 28 countries in Europe. And while, we say Europe, but it's a lot of different languages. It's still difference in regulation, whereas in the US, I think about 4% of the world's population live in the US, but as far as I know, more than 50% of the world's healthcare spend happens in the US. So naturally, if you are an entrepreneur, you sort of focus on the largest market. That said, being from Germany, and being from Europe, having lived in various European countries, I do hope that we will achieve greater market adoption also with our product, but then for digital health in general in Europe as well. It's unfortunate that you have to go to the US first. You have to prove yourself first there. And then maybe at some point you can come back and you can say, well, look, Kaiser Permanente is working with us. Look, whoever it is, Mehl Clinic is working with us. And then the European stakeholders are adopting this as well.
It's funny. I think a lot about this. And we did I remember Martin Kelly did a whole podcast with myself and Silver Cloud. We talked about how we attack those markets. And I try to use it with Health Beacon with my company that we use it as an entry point into the larger life sciences companies. So they become an entry point, but you have to get two things really right with that, which is you have to have an account strategy for that total life sciences company, which is quite difficult to maintain. And then also have to have this incredibly, dexterous local that can, tackle the local parochial aspect of how the German affiliate might buy services.
And also depends on where that company is on centralization, decentralization journey, right? Because it's constantly
going back.
It's like a pendulum swinging, but we also mentioned, and I'm trying to, I think this is the first time ever I'm kind of rushing through it because I do need to go. Unfortunately, Daniel, I'm sorry, I'm not. But I wanted to get to the blitzscaling because I think there's so much to talk about, and we've been seeing, I think, in the last, I guess, probably even a month, lots of layoffs, right, in digital health companies. First, we had insane rounds, right, and then now you could argue that a lot of that round kind of drove some of this blitzscaling. Your thoughts, Daniel, on this? You've been around the block in the internet boom and
digital health blitzscaling.
Yeah, I think so. So first of all, I'm obviously a strong believer that despite sort of current market turbulences, digital health tools are are going to be key in improving outcomes for patients. So for me, this is a macro trend that without a doubt will stay the same. As you said, we've seen pretty massive rounds, and of course, like not just in digital health, but in tech in general, when it's easy to sort of get valuations to spike, when it's easy to relatively easy. We know it's never really easy, but when it's relatively easier to raise money, there's a temptation to then say, okay, well, growth at all costs. And now, unfortunately, I've been through that already. In my very first job, 99, 2000, we came out at the peak of the dot-com bubble, and then somebody sort of basically, pierced the balloon, and the whole thing burst. And so, so we've done it to some extent at Ada, and you're never immune from having to correct to some extent. But I think others have probably scaled much more aggressively than we have, and the jury's still out on whether that works or not.
Good idea.
For me, the key thing is you should only do it. You should only do it when you're quite certain that you have product market fit. And if you do it before that, then unfortunately,
you take a lot of risk.
Yeah.
So I know you're under pressure, Eugene, so I'll hit him.
Yeah, I mean, not pressure, just I want to be respectful to the next thing anyway. But I would love to. All good. So maybe let's just go to your last question. And I'm sorry to. I would have loved to do the Tim Ferriss style again.
Yeah, no, I was.
Each one we can go deeper and deeper.
Like I'm dying to. What was that other? There was that other website was called like Dog Pound or something like that at the time. Was it like Lycos? There was another one that was like
Go, which is even a worse thing to me versus fetching. But
there were quite a few. I mean, we acquired a few of them. There was something called Hotbot. There was Alta Vista. There was Jeeves.
But what?
Site.
Like I know it's like you're a real survivor of the last great tech, boom and bust. So that's amazing. So picture yourself, Daniel. You're walking out of, you're walking out of Barcelona. You're on vacation with Barcelona with your young growing family and company, and you see this, this incredibly talented German. American trained attorney that had survived, that had been reading loads and loads of Reid Hoffman books on Blitzscaling, and it was just coming out of an MBA program that was now resettled back in Barcelona, and he was spending way too much time. But he says, Daniel, you're my mentor. I've been reading all about you. I've got this phenomenal idea of merging diagnosis and treatments and digital health interventions, and I've got this phenomenal technology. What advice would you give to that, young version of Daniel?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I mean, if you in hindsight is 2020, right? So you look back and you're like, why did we waste so much time on this or that? But then I think things happen for a reason. So I don't have a whole lot of regrets. I think I would have liked to avoid some of the mistakes actually with our sort of mild version of blitzscaling, mainly because when you scale up and then you have to let people go. For me personally, that's always that's been the hardest moment, because those aren't just numbers. I mean, the family's involved and everything. So you just wish you had been more careful in the hiring process to avoid premature scaling. The other thing, I guess, specific to digital health is, I wish I had known more about healthcare in general than I did, which could have, fortunately, I met Claire very early on. So when I met her, it was like, we're trying to build an amazing thing for doctors, but we don't have a single doctor on our team. So this was in the very early stage. And I said, can you please help us? Fortunately, she said yes twice to the company. So there are definitely no regrets there. But I would say if you go into digital health, the main thing is you you can't lose focus of why you're doing it. So you have to, the key thing is always think about the impact that you can make. And I have to say, even when I had a really terrible day and, you know, investors who pass on you, other things that go wrong, when I look at the feedback from our users, and there's almost every day, there's someone who says, this saved my child's life, this saved my mother's life, we wouldn't have gone to the doctor had we not used this. Then this reminds me of why we're doing it. And probably that's the biggest thing. I would say, as long as you believe in what you're doing, then you will be able to overcome the moments of frustration in a much better way. And I think that's the beauty of digital health. And I believe that's hopefully why we're all doing this.
Amazing.
Awesome.
On that note,
Awesome.
Thank you for joining us, and sorry for rushing us through today, but I think we got a lot in, and sounds like we're gonna have you know, season 2 of Daniel and Claire, meaning
That sounds awesome.
We'll get you. That would be fun. Cool.
And happy birthday to your son. You just had his birthday, right? Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Eugene, to your son. All the best.
No, I thought you.
No, didn't you
Thanks
say
so
yours turned 3, right? So you're out of terrible.
Oh,
twos.
yeah.
That's what
that was a few weeks ago.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay,
Yeah. Sorry. Oh, you don't have a son. You have 2 daughters, right? Sorry. I got confused.
All right.
Yeah. So
All
Yeah, I
good.
took us off in a segue. So millions of subscribers, subscribe.
Hit subscribe, pass it on, over and out. Cheers.
And best